Jamie Smith. I'm Director of Strategy and Infrastructure at South Staffordshire College. And I've got an interest in technology, or actually that's not true. I've got more of an interest in people. I'm a people evangelist, not a technology evangelist. And I suppose the way that I do things and what I've spent the last 10 years or so trying to do with differing levels of success is only ever put in place things that I believe do two essentially important things. One is make life better for people, and the other is it has to be simple to use. I think if you do those couple of things, it's fundamentally important. There's an awful lot of technologies out there of various kinds, and I mean, the classic example of what I'm getting at is if you think of your smartphone or your smart device, there's probably about 1 billion apps on the App Store, no matter what app store you use. But I'll bet you anything there's less than 10 that you use regularly. And of those less than 10, I bet that those 5 or 6 or 7 that you use in some way that matters to you personally make your life better and are simple to use. And I think that's really important in our world of education and training, and also for businesses. I think there's so much confusion about technology, and there's so much anxiety about it, actually, about which technology to use. There's millions of different apps out there and different types of technology, and there's always evangelists who are fighting for one or another and arguing that theirs is best because. But really, the two things that really matter for me are, is it simple to use and does it make life better? And if it satisfies those two things, then I think you're onto something that's worth pursuing.
You've reminded me something there, Jamie, of I'm glad you took the people-centric approach, but the anxiety. I kid you not that I've been to some well-known, especially education technology vendors, that have said to me in meetings on several times over the years, we recognise this is complex, but we have consultancy services to support. I think a lot of education technology has been kind of predicated on that ecosystem around. Yes, it's difficult, perhaps on purpose, but yeah, we can make some money on the add-ons and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think sometimes there's almost a bit of a conspiracy about some of this, and it comes from human nature, I suppose, in some ways, in that if you've spent 20 years becoming an expert in something, and then someone comes along and says, well, there's this thing over here that is really simple that does that. That's quite a difficult emotional journey for people to go on. But my contention, if you like, is that there's so much talk about technology in education right now, and I think it's for lots of different reasons, but we must never ever lose sight of the fact that education is fundamentally a social process, and therefore it's about people, not technology. Technology is just an enabling tool, whatever technology it is you choose to use. But if you focus on people as your absolute primary target in terms of really understanding people, what keeps them awake at night. I was recently invited to speak to a group of business resellers for a very large, well-known technology company, in fact, one of the largest in the world. And I was really struck by something during that event, which was that all those business partners of this company hadn't really understood what their clients actually were anxious about or what kept them awake at night. More to the point, they were really focused on how do they sell their product to those people, when really it should be the other way around. And I see this a lot. I was speaking at the BET show in January, and before I was on stage, I had an hour to have a look round, and I got to speak to and listen to a lot of the vendors that were there, and there was hundreds of them. And I was struck by a thought that really stayed with me, and it's how I started my presentation that day as well, because I said I'd never seen so many solutions in one place looking for a problem. And I really hadn't. There was so many people who had developed something they got very excited about, and in some cases had sunk their life savings into, and I'm not kidding, I met people who had actually done that. And my heart sank, because I was thinking, wow, if you'd actually started the other way around, you might have been onto something. But they had created a solution looking for a problem, and of course their journey ahead was going to be a very bumpy one, I would imagine. I go back to what I said at the start, really, about technology being simple to use and making life better. I've led many big projects over the years, often involving technology, and without exception, what I've learned from the projects that didn't achieve the success they were supposed to, as well as the ones that did, is that it really is fundamentally important that it does make life better for people and it's simple to use, because in our complex, busy lives, have you really got the time to spend hours and hours and hours learning how to use a clunky and complex corporate-looking device? Or do you want to use something that's friendly easy to use and enhances your life in some way. And let me give you a classic example of this. Last year, we did a big research problem with lots of our students, big research project, not problem. This research project, it was looking at how students like to be communicated with. How did they like us to communicate with them? And in what way should that happen? And the feedback was really, really enlightening and quite engaging, to say the least. We asked them about things like letters, because often our organisations send out letters to people. And that's true of universities, colleges and schools and lots of other organisations. And their comment about that was that that's what dead people used to do when they were alive. That's actually what they said. So then we said, well, what about text messages? Text messages are quite cool, aren't they? You text each other all the time, don't you? And they said, no, we don't. We definitely don't do that. That's what your dad sends you when you're late home. You get an aggressive text message saying, where the hell are you? You know, it's 9:30, you should be back by now. And so they saw text messages as aggressive. Now, just bear in mind that at that time, my organization was still sending out letters and then following it up with a text message. So to our customers, we must have been appearing like an aggressive zombie from beyond the grave. So we asked them, well, okay, how do you want to be communicated with? And they said apps. And we said, why? And their specific word that I've never forgotten was they said they're friendly. And I thought, well, that's interesting, isn't it? They see apps as friendly. And when you dig into why that is, it's because apps and cloud-based technologies and social media technologies are just part of the daily fabric of their everyday lives. So to them, that was completely natural, normal. And so you have to ask the question, if you're a leader in education and those are your customers, why would you expect to put those people in a very unnatural, structured situation where learning could be very, very different to that? Whereas what technology provides the educator in this context of this conversation is an opportunity to actually talk the right language using the right technologies and tools for the job, so to speak, that enables people to engage, connect and thrive in education in a different way that's very natural to those people. Because young people are digital natives, you know, I don't actually like the term digital natives, I have to say, it's not a phrase I like, but I sort of get the sentiment behind it, you know. I mean, I've got kids myself, I've got a daughter who's 17 and a son who's 9. They've grown up in a digital world, immersed in technology, and the fastest way for me to get their attention is to unplug the Wi-Fi. And they come running, as do neighbours that I didn't know I'd got that were also using my Wi-Fi, it turns out. So, you know, we live in a digital age, and you can't run an analog organisation in a digital age. You have to have the right tools for the job, and you have to use them wisely. But they are just tools. They shouldn't, teachers and educators shouldn't be, and lecturers shouldn't be afraid of technology. I understand why that happens often, but they really shouldn't, because these are fantastic tools. And none of us have got the perfect solution. None of us are perfectly using these technologies. They can all go wrong. This Hangout could go wrong in a minute, you know? That's the nature of technology. But just because that can happen isn't a reason not to engage with it and not to use it, because the prize for me, and what really excites me, is that I genuinely believe we live in the most exciting time in all of human history, because the internet has enabled us to connect and thrive and collaborate and join people in ways that you simply couldn't when I was growing up. And I think that's tremendously exciting, because learning can now happen anywhere and on any device. And I think that's a very, very exciting thing. And I'm very excited about where that journey is going to go in the coming years. And none of us can predict it. None of us can predict which way it's going to, you know, what technologies will be being used. But I think it's very exciting.
This morning, I was listening to Radio 4, and there was this thing about Socrates and Plato and irony, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, Socrates and irony. Let me look that up. And so, smartphone just there and then, you know, Google irony versus sarcasm, irony and Socrates, and you couldn't do that. You know, when I was a teenager, you had to go down to the library, go to an encyclopedia. You know, it was crazy. You hit on a really good point there, I think, about customers. Now, when technology first started, we did something called systems analysis and design. And you start with the requirements. You start with talking, you know, I remember doing that, SSADM, but you start with the customer, and then you work with, I don't know what's happened. It's just like you say, solutionism. Miles Metcalf uses that. You know, I have, and you said it, and I had it written down, and then you went, "Oh, I have a solution now. What's the problem?" I don't know what's gone wrong there. I don't know if it's consumerism or what, you know, but yet without considering how it's used. There's another thing I was talking to. I don't know if you ever come across Hannah Tyerman.
No.
Okay, she's. I've got a recording with her, but she said, I think it was my last one I did, in fact. She mentioned the difference between systems thinking and design thinking, and I got a feeling this is behind a lot of it, that in education in particular, we've come to think about the system first.
Yes.
And we put out what the system needs.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we try and fit students and teachers into it.
Yeah.
Enrollment at many colleges, you roll up, and first of all, data capture. Okay, and you might go through several stages of filling out your stuff, and then the college I was at, they wondered why 20% of the students dropped out before they enrolled.
Yeah.
They had, you know, the system thinking first.
You're absolutely right, and I think part of you're absolutely right. That's a key point. Too often in organisations, their systems and processes are administratively driven rather than customer focused. I mean, when I came in to this organisation, one of the first things I did was to sit down with people from different areas of the organisation and say, okay, walk me through how I get to be here if I'm a learner. And we stopped after about 30 minutes because at that point I'd already got about 25 post-it notes on a board that looked like there was about 25 different processes as to how you got to be here. And I thought, wow, so we're getting customers in spite of that, not because of it. And I'm very conscious of the fact that in the digital age that we now live in, attention spans are measured in seconds. So you can literally lose somebody in seconds if you're not engaging with people in the right way. So we set out on a mission to design what effectively was the fastest sort of application process in the sector. And the challenge that I put to my colleagues that I was working with really was, I said, whatever it is and however it looks, you've got to be able to do it in less than 25 seconds. And if you can't, then let's go back to the drawing board again and again and again. Now, as it happened, some very bright spark who works here came to me and said, do you mean like this? And they'd absolutely nailed it. They'd only focused on what we really need to know at that point, not the whole 6-page document of what are your hobbies, where'd you go on holiday, and all that kind of thing, because that's irrelevant. At least it's irrelevant at that point. Really, the message surely should be, look, just let us know what you're interested in, and then we'll do the rest.
Yeah.
And surely that's all you need to know at that point. And it should be a very seamless and easy journey. And that transformed a lot of what we do from the front end. We've still got an awful lot to sort out elsewhere on the journey. But you're absolutely right with your contention there about what drives our peculiar world of systems and processes, because too often it's the wrong reason. It's expertise, it's people's agendas, it's lots of other things. When really, if you focus on what you're trying to achieve, and in the case of universities and colleges, and to a certain extent schools, you're trying to attract students into those organizations, then surely you need to understand what matters to students, how they live, breathe, and operate, what they're prepared to do and what they're not prepared to do. I mean, for example, is a student of, say, 15 years of age really going to welcome being invited to an interview? Because that sounds like something that's done to you. Funnily enough, as does induction. And yet induction to me sounds like an horrific medical procedure. And yet across the country, every year, thousands of students get invited to be inducted. Now, frankly, I would probably try and avoid that if I was 15, and I'd probably just try and turn up and find out where the social networks are and who I'm going to be hanging around with and that kind of thing. Which is why one of the mantras that my chief executive has here is that he's always argued that you need a friend from day one when you arrive. And I think it's very, very important, because once again, forget your systems and processes. That goes right to the heart of the fact that we're social creatures. And I mean, that's why Facebook's got 1/3 of the world's population on it, you know, because Mark Zuckerberg was a bit of a genius and worked out that he could use technology to connect people on things that mattered to them, not to Mark Zuckerberg. You know, it wasn't about Mark Zuckerberg, it was about what mattered to them. And isn't that why people share things? Because I think intrinsically we're all a bit voyeuristic and we're all very nosy, but we're also very, very social animals. That's what human beings are. Our favorite subject area is people, really. Isn't that why soaps are so popular and lots of other things? So I think if you tap into that and you keep the focus on people and look at how technology can help people to connect and make new friends, I think that's a very, very important thing. And that's certainly how I look at technology. I always look at it, I always take a helicopter view. I never go tribal, you know. No matter how long I'm in an organization, I never become tribal. I always take a sort of helicopter strategic view and think, well, how would I look at this if I was looking at this for the first time today, you know? Would I do it this way, or would I do it differently?
Yeah, that fresh approach. You remind me something about what I can't remember who it was that said one of the skills for the 21st century is not just to learn, but how to unlearn and relearn.
That's right.
I'm not sure if it's Alvin Toffler, but yeah, that's one of our biggest problems that we mentioned quite a lot earlier about getting in a rut and getting comfortable with technology, and
Absolutely.
the risks involved in experimentation and exploration and change, and the whole system seems to be kind of stacked up against that. You know, that you don't want to fail. I remember we're digressing a bit here, but I remember clearly a Future of Technology Education talk by Kayleen Hargreaves, who at the time worked for IBM, and they were just developing this learning analytics system, and it was saying that the student should never fail, and the educationists in the room were aghast. Saying, well, isn't that an essential part of intelligence, and an essential part of learning is to learn from your mistakes and deal with failure? But the management side were in awe because they always want this curve with no failure and determinism that goes right to the core, and so the student is only given the right level of stuff at the right time on a path that they should never fail. I mean, it's a difficult argument to make, that you should let students fail. You could never pass that through senior management, I don't suppose.
Well,
you can fail safely.
You'd certainly pass it through this senior management person here, because I think failure is an essential part of innovation. I don't see, I mean, if you're not failing at anything, then frankly, you're really in a comfort zone. And if you're in a comfort zone, you've got a problem. And it's like Sir Ken Robinson has said, innovation is not optional. Anybody who thinks that the safe thing to do is to keep doing what you're doing, you're going to go extinct. This is what I love about Google. Google, outside their headquarters in the United States, have got a big skeleton of a T-Rex. And if you ask them why, it's because it's a reminder that they need to continue innovating and evolving. Otherwise, they'll end up like the T-Rex and they'll go extinct. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I live by the approach that if you're working on 10 things and 3 or 4 of them are not on fire spectacularly, then frankly, what are you doing? Because are you just in your comfort zone? Are you just doing what you're comfortable with and what you know? And if that's the case, then you're not learning necessarily anything new, which means you're not evolving, which means you might be losing your relevancy. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't just leave 3 or 4 things on fire and ignore them. What you do is you sit down and say, do we fix it, scrap it, what can we learn from it? And then you have what I suppose Google would call a fail fast, learn fast culture. But that's very essentially important for innovation. Now, there's a bit of a paradox here, of course, because too often when I'm in different education institutions across the country, whether that's a university or schools or colleges, sometimes you will encounter a dominant culture of compliance. Now, that happens for many reasons. It's not that anyone gets up in the morning and thinks, I'm just going to toe the party line, I'm going to be very compliant and do what I've been doing for 20 years. It happens for lots of complex reasons, which we probably haven't got time to go into today. But it is a problem, because if the leadership and management create a dominant culture of compliance, you are not going to be outstanding, you are not going to innovate, and at best, you will be compliant, and at best, good. And good isn't good enough in education. And the reason for that is because you've got people's lives in your hands. You've got their futures, their aspirations, their hopes, their dreams, their anxieties, their fears. It's too important to get it wrong. And you can't allow a dominant culture of compliance to get in the way of inspiring and engaging young people and helping them to get to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And so I'm very passionate about this, because my real passion is education. It's not technology. Technology is just a tool. I'm a people evangelist, if you like. And my passion is education because it offers us our greatest hope for the future. I mean, I'm very lucky. I've been very, very lucky in my life. I've traveled all over the world, and I've got to work with educators all over the world, from east to west and back again. And the thing that struck me many, many years ago was that there isn't a problem I've seen anywhere in the world where there can be any other solution other than education. Whether you're talking about a banking crisis or a difference of opinion over religion or faith or politics or whatever it might be, education is the only thing that will ultimately offer us a solution. I mean, the classic recent example, I suppose, that's a very powerful thing with people at the moment is terrorism. And if you look at what terrorism fears the most, it certainly isn't special forces. They like that. You know, terrorists are up for a good fight. By all means, send over special forces. They enjoy it. But where it really has a fear, what will kill terrorism isn't a bullet, as many finer minds than mine have already said. It's education. You can. There's a phrase that I've seen bandied around the internet about you can kill a terrorist with a bullet, but only education will kill terrorism. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true, because I haven't seen a problem anywhere in the world, whether it's an economic one or a philosophical one, where ultimately the solution is anything other than education. And where technology comes into this is that the fusion of the right technologies with the right kind of people in education can really do extraordinary things in our connected, open social world now. And there really is a revolution going on. But what's interesting is it's happening quietly. I mean, David Price has pointed this out in his book, Open, which, if you haven't read it, is the most extraordinary book. I absolutely recommend to anyone, not just with an interest in education, but anyone who's got an interest in how we're going to live, work, and learn in the future, should read the book Open by David Price. I had the huge privilege of having lunch with David not so long ago. And it was fascinating to listen to his insights and of how he thinks that the world is going to work. And he's not wrong, because his contention is that we're now in an open, social and collaborative world, and it's not going to change. The genie's out the bottle. That is the world we're now in. So for educators, this has got profound implications, because learning is now happening anywhere. And it's happening amongst peer-to-peer social networks. It's not happening in linear processes in a classroom in the traditional way it was in the last few decades that we've come through. Like when I was at school, I sat on a row of chairs, as many of us did in my generation, and there was a teacher at the front who imparted knowledge in a linear direction to me. And for some of us, we could cope with that, you know. And I think coping with it was probably the right phrase. And I could cope with passing exams and being educated in that way, but for many people, they couldn't. It wasn't a natural way of learning, and I don't think it ever was a natural way of learning. But it's happening differently now because of technology. It's now open and social and collaborative, and this is what David talks about in his book. And I think that for anyone with an interest in education, it's a really important read. It's not just a good read; it's an important one, because anybody who wants to really make a difference in education really does have to think carefully about some of the points that David raises in that book, because those points would be ignored at your peril, really.
I think we've gone full circle there with social being and people-centric being the core focus for technology and for education as well, and the human condition. You know, we do, as you were saying, you know, we are obsessed, as it were, with our peers and so on like that. And frictionless, as it were, the consumer tech. Rather than I have a solution now, what's the problem? You know, you find people. I can tell you a story. I was looking at UFI projects and bids and things a little while ago, and one Citizen Maths was on there. Now, that's a good project, but because of the needs of the UFI funding, they've got to capture all this data about who's, you know, numbers and types and all that stuff. So when you go to use Citizen Maths and you want to log in, you've got to spend probably about 12 minutes of filling in, you know, age, name, gender, blah, 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 create an account. And to be honest, I almost gave up. And I thought, let me just compare it. So I swung over Khan Academy, and I was doing a maths expedition within about about 60 seconds. I just went in with my, I think it was my Facebook account, clicked in, Facebook account in, on Maths Expedition, and I was away.
Absolutely.
And that's just, like we were saying, systems thinking first, putting the needs of the organisation above the needs of the client. It's just as well that education's kind of like a monopoly, got a captive audience. Otherwise, there is a bit of competition between organisations, not much, but otherwise, who would, like with Citizen Maths versus Khan Academy, who would go and subject themselves to 2 hours of enrolment before you can even talk to a tutor or something like that? So 25 seconds or so is that's a real takeaway for me. That really is. I should share that. And sharing, of course, social and sharing and open, absolutely crucial.